What happened to Rave's art style? Rave, also known as Rave Master, is Hiro Mashima's first manga before Fairy Tail. Obviously, Mashima is known for his iconic art style, but his characters didn't always look like this. For a while, they kinda looked like this. And to be honest, this doesn't look very good. So how did he go from something that looks like it belongs in the back of my notebook from 2nd grade to one of the most iconic art styles in the industry? In this video, I'd like to discuss the artistic evolution of Rave and explain how each of these changes would come to define Mashima's works down the line. But first, I do have two quick disclaimers. First of all, I'm only talking about the manga, so this video will not cover anything about the anime. Second, as this will look at the entire story of Rave, there will probably be some spoilers if you're not caught up on the manga. So to start, let's take a look at the introduction of our main character, Haru. And right away, you can kinda see what I'm talking about. Granted, it's in black and white, but everything is shaded just fine. His clothes actually look pretty good, but the thing that strikes you right away is his face. First of all, his hair is like a sketch for a character in the first Final Fantasy, and his face is completely flat with no real detail and just very simple features. Combine all that, and this version of Haru looks like something Mashima drew in high school. Ironically enough, Mashima might as well have been in high school. Unlike most mangaka who go to art school for formal training before they become assistants on big manga, Mashima did neither of these things. He did some art school for a short time before quitting to make manga part-time. So when you see Rave and it looks like this in the beginning, just keep in mind that Mashima wasn't exactly a pro. Another thing you might notice about this page is that when you take a close look, the background isn't all that great either. The clothes look okay, but the tree doesn't really look like a tree when you look at the details of it, and the scenery in the background is basically nothing. Again, it's not bad, but it's just very simple without any real detail. One other thing that stands out, or rather doesn't stand out about this stage, is the paneling. As Mashima was learning how to draw characters, he was also learning how to use the medium to its fullest. When you read early Rave, you'll notice that the paneling is mostly conventional, so for the most part it's really just squares and rectangles and never really veers too far from that. The only other thing I have to say about this first stage is this. As amateurish as it looks, one thing that is clear is that Mashima's skill for character design stands out even in this stage. So for example, let's take a look at Sighart, the first iteration of the infamous character that Mashima would come to use in each of his major series. So you look at his introduction in chapter 37, and while it's not the most revolutionary looking character, right away he gives off this feeling that he's a cool character. He's got the big cape, his long spiky hair, the mysterious marking on his eye. While not the most detailed or polished looking character, the DNA of what this character is meant to embody and how he would carry that on throughout the story is all there. And you can see the same level of skill in character designs in some of the early spreads. Again, are they great? Not exactly, but they actually look pretty good compared to some of the pages of the manga. Thankfully, Mashima would slowly improve over time. After about 80 chapters or so, we enter what I would consider to be the second stage of Rave's art style. There aren't a ton of dramatic changes, but there are noticeable differences before what would come to be the third stage. So it's worth noting how this serves as a transitional stage. So by chapter 80 or so, you start to notice that characters look a bit more polished. So here's Haru from before. Now let's look at some panels of Haru in chapter 135. On this page, you can tell right away that there is significant improvement. His hair, while still pretty anime looking, actually has some structure to it. It looks like it's actually behaving like hair. His hands and arms have some definition to them. The face is drawn with some perspective rather than just a flat mess. He's just an all-around better looking character. Then when you turn to this page here, you can see that when Haru gets angry, his eyes change and they aren't just these big black dots like we saw before, and we get some nice shading. Now, these characters aren't drastically different from before. When you stand them side by side, they actually look pretty similar. But at the same time, you can tell that Mashima is improving over time. Characters are just one example of this, but Mashima also improves in other areas. For example, in this same chapter, you can see how the paneling is better. Another thing I didn't mention before is how action in the earlier stage wasn't anything special. Well, here you can tell that it's more detailed and there's a better sense of motion and impact. You'll also notice that backgrounds improve as well. So before I mentioned how the trees didn't look good. They just kind of looked like sticks with wrinkles. But then you look at the cover for chapter 139 and you can tell that Mashima has improved. The trees have more detail. They bend and look like they've grown over time like real trees. Even the trees in the background have some detail. So again, while not dramatically different from before, this second stage can be seen as an all-around improvement from the earlier chapters of Rave. And this improvement only continues in the later chapters. Around chapter 171 is where we enter what I would say is the final stage of Rave's art style. And for the most part, the only big differences are the characters and the action. And for this stage, let's take a look at Ellie, the female lead of Rave. So here's Ellie from stage 1, and here's Ellie from stage 3. And here's where we can start to see where Mashima was stepping into his art style for Fairy Tail. Eyes are more clearly defined, her hair looks much better, again, just an all-around better looking character. But what separates this stage from before is the characters in this stage are more stylized. So you look at this page of Haru in the same chapter, and while his eyes are still big, his irises take up less space, and the outlines of the eyes aren't enclosed. There's actually some gaps. And instead of just a normal circle, his face is shaped in a way where it comes into a sharp point at the chin, something that's fairly common in Fairy Tail. Now, like I said, the only other big difference are the fights. Again, no particular changes as far as style goes, but the improvement in how these fights look is incredible. You have Sighart versus all of the mages, which looks insane. This fight is so stunning that it instantly became one of my favorite moments in all of Mashima's manga. And then you get the final arc against Lucia, and you get all the crazy looking panels where he fights off against Haru, and everything just clicks. The action, the impact, the speed, the perspective, the scale, the backgrounds even. It just goes to show how much Mashima improved over the course of 300 chapters. Now, before I close out the video, I do have some final thoughts. As I said before, above all else, I think Mashima's greatest skill in terms of art is his character designs. Like we mentioned before, even when the art wasn't as polished, the character designs were great. And even now, the character designs only get better. It's one of the first things you notice in any of his manga, and it's something that you have to respect. Although this isn't to say everything improved in Rave. Even in the last few chapters, you can spot a few panels where the anatomy of characters is a bit off. Like, you'll see some panels of Haru where his shoulders don't look quite right, and you're just like, eh. Finally, while the paneling certainly improves, I still don't think it's anything crazy by the end of Rave. It's good, but I wouldn't go so far as to say it's great. But aside from that, Rave is a series that sees some pretty significant changes. The characters go from amateurish to amazing. The backgrounds go from boring to beautiful. And the action goes from just okay to addicting. It's all the more inspiring when you remember that Mashima had very little experience in the industry prior to this manga. And it's amazing to look back and see how this would inspire the art of Fairy Tail. So for all of these reasons and more, I think we can all agree that the art of Rave will always be special. But now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you describe Rave's art style? How does it compare to other manga? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my video on Fire Force. In that video, I describe the artistic evolution of Fire Force. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.